Twitless, what are we talking about today?
We are talking about DC's All In, The New Gods. And this is a another reimagining of Jack Kirby's fourth world mythos, which is meant to be a new mythology of new gods, new myths, new lore. It's meant to be a mixture of Jack Kirby's crackle and his design, his unique take on science fiction and fantasy, all the stuff that people love from his take on Asgard and Thor, but a completely made up set of a made up pantheon of gods, goddesses, and relationships. And so this is a new take on that idea. It's also tied in with some of the absolute universe, I think. We have a universe now that's more tainted by dark side, essentially. I think that's why we're getting edgier takes on a lot of these reimaginings of characters. Um, so in this new retelling, we get reintroduced to mainstays like a Light Ray and Orion, who is a child of dark side. He's a child of two worlds. He's a child of dark side, who's the embodiment of darkness and evil, but he's raised on New Genesis, which is essentially the um, Asgard heaven kind of parallel, and he's raised by a High Father, who is a little bit like Odin, but there's a little bit more to it than that. He has a shepherd's crook as opposed to a sword or other weapon. He's got some Judeo-Christian elements going on with him, and but in this version, in this universe, he's a little less um, benevolent. So he's approached by a Metron. Metron is kind of this god of space and time and knowledge, and he's kind of a bit of a doomsayer. And he brings a prophecy essentially that there's a child to be born, a new god, haha, who's going to be born, who's going to bring great change. And a High Father, unfortunately, and seemingly out of character, tasks Orion to find this child and kill him. And so Orion ends up seeking out Mr. Miracle scot free for a means to kind of forestall this doom, because Orion's really good at what he does, but what he does isn't very nice. So that's kind of the basic rundown of what's going on in the new gods. So what do you guys make of that?
So, some of my disappointment with this issue stems from the fact that it's based in the all in uh, direction that all of these books are taking. There's a little bit too much reference and knowledge necessary of things happening outside of the story to really understand where the impact of events occurring within the story are. A lot of talk about Darkseid being dead and how that's disrupted a balance, and characters now facing challenges such as when we're first introduced to Orion, he's fighting a lot of Darkseid's former forces and how they've gone awry and needing to be reined in once again. And then I see where Rom is taking this, where he's establishing kind of this new gods, new Genesis world that we're going to be immersed in for much of the story. It takes its time though to get to any kind of conflict and establishing events that are going to be carrying the rest of this maxi series. I believe it's going to be 12 issues, where first we're having conversations with Metron, then we're having conversations with Orion about the conflicts coming up, and then we're introduced to Mr. Miracle, who's Mr. Mom in this iteration. He's at home, he's changing diapers, he's getting peed on, and it takes a little bit of effort to finally get everybody on the same page. And by the time that all happens, we pretty much end this issue with a final scene of, I guess, an entity that's going to play a significant role later on in the story. So, for a first issue, I really would have liked to have things jump in a little bit more feet first. But I appreciate that there is a lot of establishing that needs to happen with this series, given that it's part of the All In universe. What's your
I,
guys' take?
I would also say that there's something that when it comes to the new gods, there's always going to be a bit of a threshold you have to meet. There's kind of a bar, that you kind of have to hit, because as opposed to like Asgard or Olympus, any of the other myths or pantheons that you could invoke, where you can kind of assume if I signify that's Odin and that's Loki. There's a lot of just lore you just know, just because if you just have basic knowledge of your myths, you don't
Yeah, you
need
can
necessarily
piggyback on it. You know,
right. The new gods is meant to be really new, and so every time you introduce the new gods, you kind of have to do some establishing because it's the fourth world. It's Jack Kirby's mythology that he made up all on his own, and so the only lore that people have established for it is the comic book lore, which changes a bunch. So there isn't this established kind of you know um, lore that's tied to a particular culture or a nation or heritage. There, it's just it's a mythology system made specifically for comic book nerds.
yeah. I mean, I always thought of New Gods. I until until 5 minutes ago, I think I thought of it the same way everyone else did. Was this? It's a Jack Kirby thing that only exists because of Jack Kirby, and it's kind of a it was given permission to happen because of who Jack Kirby was, and you give the story permission to take these kind of risks and to explain itself and kind of have these de novo origin stories for all these fresh mythologies, just because of the trust that you placed in this particular illustrator and how he's been able to deliver over the decades before. And so it's wild to see. So that kind of sits on its own to me. That's how it's always been explained to me, Kirby's New Gods. And to see a reappraisal of that franchise and to take a fresh stab at it seems wildly unusual. I don't know. It does need a I do wanna say that the art here, I think, was really strong, and clearly you need top tier. You can't bring your B team to re-envision the New Gods because people have very clear, I think, understandable visual expectations that this is gonna be a really strong. It's gonna be a feast of the eyes, and I thought it was really, strong in that sense. I feel like that was probably the strongest aspect of this because I think I agree. It's almost it felt like, I had to do a double take and check the cover again because it didn't feel like a issue 1 'cause, it just felt like, um, it almost felt like a middle story where, to some extent, you're expected to kind of, already be in the know in some way, and, it just contrasting with what we've seen with, some of the absolute stuff coming out of DC, where they really do kind of build from the ground level up, where this it does have the origin, it does have that dark side origin in a way, but I just feel like Jack Kirby did it better, and I was willing to give Jack Kirby a longer leash to try some fresh, weird new stuff, and I just don't know if I just trust DC to do fresh, weird stuff on their own, if that makes sense. Even just to re-envision something that was out of the very eccentric mind of one of their illustrators from decades ago. So
Wait,
I've remained to be sold on this.
Let's take a brief pause to hear from the awesome creators joining us today and find out what cool projects they're currently working on.
Hey guys, if you love sword and sandal historical fiction with a healthy dose of ancient Roman and Egyptian fantasy mixed in, then check out Kyrie. We've got 450 pages printed so far, a fourth book on the way. Order your books today at curiecomic.com.
modern day classic superhero storytelling. Get The Adventures of Omega Girl issues 1 through 5 now on Indie Planet.
Thank you to our awesome creators, and now back to the video.
When you talk about the artwork being strong, I do want to point out the first 4 pages, which actually has a guest artist, which is Jorge Fornes, I think, if I'm probably butchering that name. But the first 4 pages do some very interesting things from the language of comics. You have kind of a dead goddess floating through space, approaching the source wall, which is a fascinating thing that part of the fourth world, which is this wall of essentially like dead gods who are close to like the source of all knowledge and power and life in the universe. It's this really one of the more fascinating things that Jack Kirby kind of contributed to mythology is the source wall. And you have this dead goddess kind of approaching it, and there's actually a kind of a breakdown of the panels themselves. The panels kind of just disintegrate as she's approaching the source. And there's some interesting kind of interpretations you can get from that as the language of comics breaks down as this god approaches the source of creativity for the universe. So I really liked that. That's actually probably one of that a very good uh, literary double page spread. I actually liked it better than even some of the other pages from that first introduction where things are getting kind of weird and loopy. There's even some overlap with some of what we've seen with heavy metal or Philippe Drouillet, even I think a little influence with some of the page explosions that are going on in those first few pages before the story really kind of digs in. So I do like that, and so I always like to highlight those moments. So definitely a strong first 4 pages to be sure.
Yeah, definitely. And not to take anything away from the regular artist, Evan Cagle. Not 100% sure how to say his name either. But his work is really strong when he's paired with Rom. They worked together as well on Detective Comics, which was a great run. People should definitely go check that out. Maybe we'll get a chance to talk about it someday. But yeah, I agree. The first 4 pages, really interesting stuff happening there. Later on, it tries to set up a little bit of New Genesis, but then it gets into just a lot of mundane conversations and sitting around on the bench with Mr. Miracle, having a latte, talking about the end of the universe and how he has a mission that he has to go on. So that part really felt incongruous with the rest of the issue. And I don't know why the sudden shift in tone was taken. I'm curious to see where Rom goes with that for the rest of the series, if that's going to be a running theme for the characters to have this kind of very casual rapport within the setting of a spectacular otherworld, mythical universe established by Jack Kirby. So would like to see how he's planning to play with those dynamics a little bit and these character interactions.
Yeah, one of the other strong aspects of this number one is the coloring. I actually really appreciated the there's something called relative coloring where you don't actually color them as you think of them on a white sheet of paper. You color them just in relation to each other. Objects, everything is in the pink spectrum, but something slightly in the purple, something slightly in the green, but they're mostly all. If you looked at the colors by themselves, they'd all be pink. That sort of thing. I think that I know that sounds kind of obscure, but when I think of Kirby's New Gods, I think of strong, bold. I mean, part of that is the eccentricities of what how comics were colored back then. But in order to get that kind of crackle, and if you're not the illustrator bringing the crackle, you're just bringing strong illustration skills. I feel like you kind of have to take those kind of edgier, uh, kind of poetic coloring decisions that you see in Kirby's New Gods. You got to. It's actually really fun to try and see that done. I like to do that all the time when I'm coloring to try to push that in news stories, and they're doing this in the New Gods for this particular issue. You'd see this through at least half it until Mr. Miracle is changing diapers. Everything before that, they really give you a heightened sense of reality with some pretty kaleidoscopic colors and a lot of relative coloring where you just kind of get like hot and cool kind of tonal appreciations for where they're going scene to scene, and that takes some high caliber talent to pull that off, and it was done well here.
Final thoughts, guys. Metzi.
I because of what Kirby did with the New Gods and how much of a how much of a strange eccentric legacy that has had, the fallout of that success has had in the DC universe. I'm willing to trust DC to try and capture that the without that same master being behind the curtain. I think it's going to be really interesting, particularly that it's all in, and allegedly that's for someone like me who only has a very sporadic understanding of the lore for mainstream comics. So on the confidence of what has been done before for this IP, and frankly, because they put some of the best talent I think that they can muster at DC on this particular project visually, I think that we're probably going to get a solid run. At least it's going to be eye candy. So I'm willing. I think I'm still all in, at least for number two.
Oh, all in.
Twitless. Final thoughts.
It's kind of hard to say. This comic feels like it's over before it begins. I think it's just, and I think, well, Red, you'd mentioned it feels kind of abrupt, and I think that's wise. It barely gets into the setup for what the main conflict's going to be, and then the issue's over. It really just just feels so sudden, and I'm at that point, it's hard to judge. You really have to be a couple issues in before you can say, look back and go, oh, okay, I actually like where we're going with this. Definitely some strong art in some places. I actually kind of liked the moment with Scott Free with the baby, because we also saw Barda being overwhelmed by the baby. And so the fact that both parents were kind of just, zonked out of their minds was nice. Sometimes the portrayal we get is just the dad who's just clueless and overwhelmed, a trope. I kind of tired of that particular one. So the fact that he's actually taking care of her because she's completely out of it, and also a little overwhelmed, but at the same time was at least a nice sharing of the burden there. You have Barda, I think, like, she's delirious. She's referencing Granny Goodness, I think, in her sleep. She's just completely tired because of this baby.
Yeah,
So
it was a cute scene. It
yeah, there was
was.
a couple cute moments. Other than that, like I said, it really just remains to be seen. We just really didn't get enough. I hope we don't get to see Highfather get too undermined. He's supposed to be a beacon of. He's supposed to be a duality. Dark side is literally supposed to be darkness incarnate, which kind of implies by the opposite factor that Highfather is supposed to be light incarnate, and he's definitely doesn't really come across that way, I think, in this story with that go kill a baby.
Thank you very much for checking out the video. Subscribe, like, and stay tuned for more.